I'll start the recording.
Great. Did we just start now? Okay, welcome everybody. So today I'm actually going to give a little introduction, if people don't mind, to Siman Sadi Aleph. I think what we're really talking about is non-cooking interactions between basar and halab, right? We are going to have heat involved, and we're going to have salt involved, but we're not going to yet have a case of like I actually cook them together, right? It's going to be something fell into something else. Maybe they're both cold, and so forth. And there's really kind of three or four, depending on how our time goes, interactions I want to talk about because that's what the Tour Shulchan Aruch wants to talk about, and that's for all of us really the guide, which is first is really just two pieces of food touch each other. Second is food touches a kli, which may or may not be the same thing. And then we're going to talk about what happens when those and when they're actually those first two cases are when things are all cold. Then we're going to move into one of the cases where one of them is hot, and then we'll maybe, if we have time, which we've seen already in Siman, is it Kufay, I believe. No, excuse me. Yeah, in Kufay. And then we're going to move to salt. What if one of them is salted and maybe one of them isn't salted, and so forth. And so if they touch each other, how much worry do we have? Is there transfer of something from one to the other? And how do we fix it? And one of the things that's going to sit in the background of all this, I think, is going to be a question of klipa. Is klipa ikar hadin? Is klipa chumra? Is it, and I think the answer to that is going to be yes to both of those. Sometimes it's ikar hadin and sometimes it's a chumra be'alma. And we'll have to deal with when is it which one of them. So that's how I want to introduce this. Any questions or thoughts before we dive in?
It seemed like you listed 4 things instead of 3 things, or was I confused?
Did I say 4 and say that there were going to be 3? I'm sure the number keeps changing in my head. So,
okay.
But it's 2 types of cold interactions, which are food kli, right? Which will take up the first 3 seifim really, and then it'll be hot cold interactions. We're really going to talk about food in particular. Maybe that extends to kalim, and then unsalted interactions. Okay. So
the cold interactions are Rosenzweig and Goober.
There we go.
2 yekas.
Yeah. So
whereas Goober only talks about hot interactions.
It's true. I'm odd.
So all right. With that, I'm going to share my screen. I'd like to do some initial sources. I want to start for Seif Aleph with Mishnah and Gemara and Chulin, both very short, but I want to read them very carefully, if that's okay. So let me see. Make this very big and there you go. Okay. And then, of course, I have to move my window around so people can see it. All right, Jacob, you were here first. Do you want to read for us? We're going to start. This is for people following along. If you could follow along, by the way, not on my screen, but in an actual sefer, even better, Ati Shapir. So we're in Chulin, in the Mishnah in Chulin. It's in Perek Kol Basar, Perek Chet, Mishnah Bet. Go for it, Jacob.
Sorer Adam Basar Gvina Bimat Pachad Achad Uvilvad Shlo Yehu Nogin Zabazah. So one may wrap meat and cheese in like one cloth, as long as they don't touch each other. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Shnei Ach Nain Ochlin Al Shulchan Achad Zabasar V'Zagvina V'Ein Choshin. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said 2 guests that are eating at one table, this one's eating meat and this one's eating cheese, and you don't have to worry.
Great. Well, the seif of this Mishnah is not going to be our concern today. I think it does connect in many ways. But I just want to start with a couple of questions. First off, right? What kind of language is this? Lechatchila, b'diavad? Doesn't have to be Jacob. Can be anybody.
Seems like it's lechatchila.
Yeah. Sounds like what are your hints to the fact that it's lechatchila?
Well, for me, I'm thinking about is starting with uvil vad. It's like there's this condition
Mm-hmm.
do it.
So
Right. And it's also so rare. A person does
Beautiful.
this. A person can do this.
Yeah.
Not a person, if the person did this blank. It says
Ex-
so rare. Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, the participle form of the verb, right? Usually it would be sarah gam basar gvina pachat echad, and then usually it'd be like, mutar or, something like that. That's, this is very much sounds like lechatchila language. In both cases, right? You can both, if you're, both guests at an inn who seem to not know each other, let's say, you can eat basar and gvina at the same table, and you can wrap, right, in one napkin, basar and gvina together as long as they don't touch each other, right? Now, what does it imply? What if they do touch each other? Just from this Mishnah. I know we're going to see the Gemara, but
I mean, that it's that a sore in some way.
good, right? It seems to be problematic. Otherwise, it wouldn't say that. It would just say "Sarar dam basar gvina pachat echad," right? End of story, right? Something bad happens when they touch each other. Well, what bad things can happen?
Can be taste or something like that, but it seems like bediavad it would be okay. Like I don't know, from the language of the nation.
Good. It could be maybe that nothing happens, and just like lechacheli, you shouldn't do it because of some other reason, right? Or it could be that there is a transfer of something here, right? That's the question. Although they sound like we've been doing this for a while. We know about. Yeah, go ahead, please. So.
Pshat Mishnah, if we take the safe of the Achsanaim, is the actual chashash here is not mishum basar v'cholov, is mishum to eating them together. Like we're not afraid that they'll touch each other, and something some transfusion will happen here. They're not separated enough, and because they're both yours, you might eat them together. And the Achsanaim, even though they're very close to each other, because they both have their own meal that they paid for it, there is no chashash they'll actually come to eat each other's meal at the same time.
Yeah, beautiful connection between the Reish and the Seifa, right? That the concern here is really I'm going to eat milk and meat together, right? Which was kind of last week's. This kind of justifies the organization of the tour so nicely, right? Last week was what waiting time between. Was that last week? I think it was last week. Waiting time between. No, is that 2 weeks ago now? But it came before, right? You kind of have to know that as a basis. That's okay. Last week was Sadi. Oh, last week was Kachal. So yeah. That eating milk and meat itself, even though like with the ikar of the isur is cooking them together, eating them cooked together, even eating them together is a problem. And here we have a concern that you're going to now eat milk and meat together if they touch. So good. Okay, good. Any other thoughts on this Mishnah before we see this short Gemara on this? Okay. Jacob, you read so nicely. Let's read the Gemara here for us.
V'chi noga zeb zeb my have. Sonin but sonin he. Or who? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Probably who.
So, and if they touch each other, what is this? What's the issue?
I almost want you to say, so what? Right?
Yeah.
So what?
It's
right.
It's something cold touching something cold.
Mm-hmm.
Amar Abaye nehi de klipa lobai hadacha mi lobai.
Yeah, which really should be like a rhetorical question mark. I left in the punctuation from Bar Ilan here, but which I don't always like. So okay, explain.
So I guess it would be that we don't. Would it be that we don't need klipa, or and you would say that? Would we say that we need rinsing?
Yeah, would we not need rinsing, right? Hadacha milo bae, So good, I want to back up. I want to take this down piece by piece. So what's the assumption of the Gemara before Abaye comes in and explains the Mishnah for us?
That there's no actual transfer of even flavor.
So, right, we've talked about, that things transfer flavor. We've talked about sli, we've talked about bishul, we've talked about melicha, right? Maybe, and we'll see that, right? When melicha, we're talking not about like salty cheese and salty meat. We're talking, well, maybe if it's meat, even for the derech, right? If it's salted so that, it's jerky, maybe. But in general, like there's no transfer of flavor. So what's the problem? So Sonan is like the one thing we're.
Can you sharpen that a little bit and relate it to the word sonan? The question might be a little
Really?
bit different.
Than I'm saying. You're saying?
I think I mean, you could say it the way you're saying, but I think you could say it a little different. You could say the question is, we only thought there's only an Isser when there's heating involved, and there's no heating involved here.
Mhm.
That's maybe the question. In other words, transfer of flavor is the result of heating, but the Isser is bishul. The Isser is bishul, and so there's no bishul here. So it's sonen b'tsonen. In other words.
So what's the problem, right? And so what's Abaye? Essentially, Abaye gives us what the Hava Amina was, and he gives us an answer of what's actually going on, right?
Yeah.
Right. What's the Hava Amina?
That we would need klipa.
Why?
Because that I guess we've established enough that there will be some transfer from touching, especially because we've talked about like the fattiness of different things and how that can transfer. But
Exactly.
we're actually saying that he's actually saying that no, it's the transfer is not even that much, but you should still rinse it in case there's any little bit.
Well, good. He hasn't said us why we have to rinse it, but right there's for some reason something has, and I mean you've guessed, right? That's the next question is well why do you need hadacha? And there must be some, I mean it doesn't have to be bus. I'm going to open it actually. Why do you need hadacha? Like what's happened here?
It's not actually for transferring because hadacha is like counterintuitive to transferring because like the whole hadacha thing is that we're not doing anything intrusive. We don't assume that anything entered into the meat or into the milk. It's superficial. We're worried about residue, meaning the meat was I don't know, had juices around it, or the cheese was had a bit of moist on it, and now you have cheese moist on your meat or meat juice on your cheese.
Right. I mean, it is transfer. It's just a different type of transfer. It's not mavlia or maflitz. It's just like on the, get something on the surface of the cheese. It'll be like, like meat juice, meat specks, or vice versa.
That was what I was getting at with like, it might be like like the fat, if it's cold or something congealed, but it still might touch the surface of kind of like, because I know there's stuff talking about like congealing on a knife and stuff like that with fat. So
what I see here,
and also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, what I see here is that is sort of the invention or the coming, how do you say, becoming aware of the rabbinic prohibition of eating, milk and meat together, of eating, residue of milk and meat together. In other words, because midoraita, right, there's obviously no isser here. There must be some kind of rabbinic prohibition of eating cold milk and meat together. Is there another place that we have it, or is this the source for it?
I mean, we have that eating them one right after another is a problem, which sounds like eating them together would also be a problem, right? It's you can't have one without the
kol shekei, right? Kol shekei.
But I think that's it. No, I think Rav Nachum, you're completely right. Is that from the Torah, right? If I put a piece of meat on a piece of cheese and ate them together, that's not bishul, right? And there's no penetration of one of the other, right? There's no actual mixing of milk except in my stomach, I guess. Maybe my mouth cooks. I don't know, right?
Why is the penetration, the mixing matter?
Because there's no milk meat combination that ever happens in that sense, right? There's no. Go ahead, Yavi.
I mean, Deoraita, if you took liquid milk and like meat gravy and mix them together, it also wouldn't be a problem, right? Because the bishul is required to. Is bishul like bishul or achila of bishul, or right? That's what matters. Deoraita, right?
Yeah. So cold wouldn't be a problem at all, right? It's an interesting question of when liquids get mixed together, but yeah, no, I think you're right. Right, that wouldn't be a problem. And so this is really a strengthening of that, but derabanan, that is a major problem of eating them together. You can't do that, and it might even be why we're not so worried. Like if you wrap them up nicely, we're not starting to like get concerned that they might touch each other. If they touch each other, you have to fix them. But it might be. Well, we'll see. I anticipating the Shulchan Aruch already. So actually, I'm going to back up on that.
But actually, you're also going to like cook it, maybe, right? You have this piece of meat which has this like residue of cheese, but then you're going to cook it. You're going to cook the meat, so that might be also a problem. Like,
yes, and we're going to see that actually when we get to the run. So yeah, Rav Landis.
Yeah, no, thinking about what Rav Nachum introduced, often, we think of D'Rabbanans as preventing a D'Oraisa, which may very well be the case here. But also, it sounds like, in other words, there's also an issue of approaching the Isur, not just like preventing the Isur. These including those examples that you give of getting them so close together that they're, anyway, that's all I wanted to say. It's not just preventing an Isur, it seems like it's approaching the Isur, and therefore that seems to be a nuance there for me. I'm sorry, Lexi.
I feel like we've talked about this a couple of times, for example, with chicken and stuff like that, where it's not just the idea of, oh, this thing in and of itself is not problematic, but I'm worried it's a slippery slope to the problematic thing. But that a lot of times D'Rabbanans, it's articulating, actually, we intuitively feel that this in and of itself is a problem. Not like, oh, it actually is totally fine in and of itself that you eat these together. It's just that we're worried about you cooking. It's like, no, actually, we feel like there's something wrong even in this act, even if it's less seriously wrong than if you were to cook them together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's not quite saying the same thing, but it's almost as, sometimes I like to think about it. The Torah has a thrust in a certain direction, and we're saying, yeah, those two things shouldn't, come together in any way. We're saying you can't cook them. Yeah, we should maybe even, not because you may come to cook them, but that there's a problem of milk and meat together in the first place, and therefore we're going to keep them even further apart. So, or keep going down that direction. But okay, with that, I want to open to the Shulchan Aruch. Study Aleph, Seif Aleph, and I want to read it. So let's see. I'm gonna. Who should read? Jessica, are you up for reading? And one thing I want to ask is to pay attention is, how is his language potentially the same or different from what we've seen in the Mishnah and the Gemara? So. And you're on mute, Jessica.
I've just realised I've grabbed the wrong Shulchan volume, so I'll be back in a second. You should probably get someone else to read while I find Yoreh.
So, don't worry, you'll be the next one then. Raphael, read Shulchan. I'm gonna stop my share for the moment too, just so.
I didn't
You're on
get
mute also.
What are you trying to read?
Shulchan Aruch, Study Aleph.
So that will also take me a second to open. Please, can somebody else?
New rule: the Shulchan Aruch should be open at all times. Sarah's got it. Sarah, go for it.
I was not showing that I had the book. I was just trying to get myself situated. I'm not at my normal desk. Okay. Basar gvina shena'agu ze bazeh mutarim ela shetzarich lahadiach makom nigiatan umutar latzur otam b'mipachat achat v'lo chayshinan shema yigu ze bazeh.
Great. All right. Maybe just a general explanation. I think we know it now, but
I think just to like highlight things that seem different from what we've already seen. Just comes out and says that if they've touched their mutar, but you just need to wash off the place where they have touched, and you can put them in one, like under one cloth, and you don't have to be concerned that they would come to touch each other.
Good. What's the major difference from the Mishnah, by the way?
That seems to be a little more makil than the Mishnah, that last piece.
Good. What are the key words?
Right. V'lo chayshinan shema yigu ze bazeh.
Yeah. Right. The Mishnah said as long as they don't touch, right? And here it's like, it's and we don't have a concern. Now, obviously, I think, what he says, if they do touch, then you have to do hadacha, but you're not even like, we don't have a chazak, we don't have an assumption. I don't want to say chazaka. We don't have an assumption that they're going to touch each other. So, so slightly different. He also starts with the principle, and then that we get out of it. Rav Nachum, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, but I agree with you that the language is different, and it seems to imply what you're saying. But if you're going to have to wash them if they do touch, then when you put them in, you're probably going to have to put them in a way to try to prevent them from touching because you don't want to have to wash them.
Yeah.
So it ends up being really the same thing because you should try to prevent them. Either way, you should try to prevent them from touching. Because unless you like washing your food all the time, maybe it's a kind of food that you normally wash, then maybe you don't. But right.
Good. That leads us into the next piece, actually, really nicely, right? Is if it's something that you're going to, although I'm very curious if there's something you're planning on washing anyway that you're wrapping in a napkin, because I don't know, the way I think about it is things that are dry, you're probably not going to wash off. Although maybe no, that could be wrong because we'll see that it's things that are like, beef jerky, essentially, you might want to soak to get rid of some of the salt and so forth. So, okay, good. I want to leave Aleph at that unless there's any other comments on it or thoughts. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing screen. We're going to do, I hope people don't mind and it won't give anybody a headache. We're going to go kind of back and forth between screen sharing and not here today. So I just want to see the run here. Hadacha miha Abaye. This is right Abaye's statement that even though it doesn't need klipa, it however needs hadacha. And so now that Jessica got up and got your Shulchan Aruch, I'm gonna have you read something that's not from the Shulchan Aruch. If you're still there, you are. I said to scroll up, but you're on mute too.
Yeah. Okay. Umishum hachi, but no, it's just like in pieces very slow. Umhachi bainen shelayu nogein zabza shemai shachech velayadich. V'katav haravad zelashna de besat hafel she'en klivishla bela haracha afigeim sheru delay kalamicha shemai shachech velayadich v'katav rabal ha'ita kol lavracha shemutha niach besat hafel או דגים בכלי אסור, או אצל מאכל אסור, שאין דרך לאכלן בלא הדחה לעולם.
Good. So, explain for us.
So the concern about touching, we don't want to put things together that might touch because we might forget to wipe them. But if they're things that we'd never forget to wipe, like kind of like raw, uncured meat, and that sort of thing, then there's no reason to worry about. Like you're definitely going to remember to wipe it, so it's fine for them to touch.
Yeah. I just make a little diuk. If I can make a little diuk jumping in, we haven't talked about kinuach yet. We're talking about only mediach, which is washing, right? That will be an interesting question. Are those two things equal or not? But for the moment, let's just keep it to the language of wash.
Of washing, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the Itter says that it's to put raw unsalted meat in a treif dish or buy treif food, because you're definitely going to come to wash it off.
Great. Which the assumption then is if I put something I'm not going to wash on a treif dish, what's the halacha?
The assumption is it's not okay, which is concerning for everyone's like bowls of cereal in the hotels and all.
Good. This is going to be a big question of like, well, wait a second, what's the problem with that, right? Because when people mentioned it about, two pieces of food touching, right? People said, well, maybe there's some pieces that go from one to the next. What happens? What's the problematic interaction between the kli and the food? Any thoughts?
Lots of stuff later about how clean the.
Good. It could just be a cleanliness. Maybe we have an assumption, although we'll see, right? That we actually won't see it today, but there is some in other places an assumption that stam kelim are mudachim, right? But maybe it's not a clean kli. Good. That's a possibility. I saw something really. Anybody else have a thought? We're gonna explore this avenue for a little bit. But I actually saw in the Binat Adam where he makes a claim. Binat Adam is the in the Chochmat Adam, he has both in the Chai Adam and the Chochmat Adam. Rav Danzig has his own kind of commentary on it. And he says maybe it's talking about Kli Cheres, and Kli Cheres, we've seen a principle that Kli Cheres is kind of like takes on the food identity of the thing that it absorbs in a way that other kelim don't. which is maybe why it's never kosherable. That was he struggles with this a little bit too as a principle.
That comes up in the shach.
Is that directly in the shach, or does he
later in the shach, not in the big one that you mentioned?
No, the big one. Okay. So that's quite fair too, that the shach also brings it. I guess shach predates. I think he predates. Yeah, he does predate the Chochmat Adam. So by quite a bit actually. Okay, good. So we'll get to that a little bit. Before we dive into that, I'm actually going to skip the next piece. I want to look at this Gemara in Psachim, which is going to be very important. And so Raphael, go ahead and read for us.
Amar Rava, Amar Rav Chiya barashi, Amar Shmuel, kol kelim שנשתמשו בהן חמץ בצונן, משתמש בהם מצה, חוץ מן בית שאור. הואיל ושחימוצו קשה. אמר רב אשי, ובית חרוסת כבית שאור שחימוצו קשה דמי. אמר רבא, אני אגנא דמחוזה, הואיל ותדיר מלישה באור חמירה, ומה שהוא באור חמירה כבית שאור שחימוצו קשה דמי פשיטא. מה עוד תימא כיוון דרביך שליט באור אווירה, ולא בעלי, כלומש מלון. So translating, here in the Gemara we have this idea that even though we used kelim for tzonen, because that's the way you use for actually creating bread, or at least not cham till the end. There, some of them might be chametz, or at least you're not supposed to use them in Pesach. That's a better definition.
Well, you can put right. Sorry, I've seen this before a few more times than you have, so I'm just going to make a little correction. Right, this word, by the way, betzonen, is going to be really important. Not everybody has this girsa, but which makes a huge difference. Right, if you use them for chametz, you can use them for chametz sonen. We'll take this version, like with cold chametz. You can put matzah in them, right? Essentially, right? You can store matzah, except for, what's the exception? Keep going.
Except for betzil, this place that you actually like.
Wait, I have a question. I have a question, Joel. Is it matzah or is it when making matzah? Is it dough? Is it matzah dough or is it matzah? It's different because matzah dough, you could imagine that there might be a little bit stuck on the side and it sucks it out.
That comes up in the shach.
Yeah, I wanted to leave it ambiguous for the moment, but yeah. So that's a great question.
Sorry.
No, it's a great question. It's not so clear what you're doing with it, right? It could just be putting matzah in, which is how some people are going to have to say it in order to reconcile this. But I actually think you're right. I think it's that you're actually playing around with matzah in it, so to speak, right? You're kneading the dough. It might be the pshat reading of this, right? I have a bowl that I use like maybe to knead my bread during the Beit Seor is an interesting question, but let's say for the moment maybe I make my bread in it during the year. Here I make my matzah in it now, right? That could be it, and as long as I use it only for cold, it's fine. So, with one exception, right? The Beit Seor. Right?
Yeah, but like it sounds that the Gemara is speaking about kelim in a more general sense, not only bread making kelim, and specifically in this part of Masechet Pesachim, chametz and matzah used for like a broader category of kosher lepesach food and not kosher lepesach food. Meaning the question here is a question of kashrus kelim for Pesach. Meaning is it like is this kli chametz? Will it make the food I put it in chametz? And that's the chiddush here, that even though we didn't use it with hot, when I use this bet seor, like I don't know, I use my bet seor in Pesach, I want to use this dish that I usually have my yeast in, I want to drink wine in it. But no, because chimutzo kosher, because there's chametz there all the time, and I don't know, it's like shouting out of its walls, so it makes chametz, it makes things chametz.
Yeah, well, so it's a question of, is there a transfer of, and so the Beit Seor, which is presuming where you stored your sourdough starter or where you use your sourdough starter, right? That somehow has an ability to transfer something. Maybe it's because things are stuck to it. Maybe it's because it does transfer flavor. We don't know. But the matzah, but the other dishes, we're not so worried. You can put the matzah in there, but only in this version of it if the thing is used bitzonen, right? In other words, it didn't absorb hot things, right? At some point. On the other, if you take out the word sonen, then it doesn't matter if the kli, right? You put the matzah in it, you play with the matzah in it, and there's no worries about it.
So. Joel, is it with the Beit Seor that it's so, it's the source of the Seor. It's this, so it's like, it's very intense. It's very, very strong. It's not the normal Seor. It's very, and people are very proud of their Beit Seor. They keep it for years. What do? You used to always get these shilas. Can I sell it? Can I sell it to the maid? Or in our case, the maid. We had a maid one day a week. She took it home with her because she didn't want it to be destroyed. I mean, you have these things.
So good. It's like there's some greater intensity of that. I mean, the Gemara says, right? Its ability to like make things chametz, or its chametz-ness is like really strong, right? It's whatever that means. Yeah.
I mean, that's what made me think it's talking about dough, because you wouldn't, if I put applesauce in it, it's not going to make my applesauce into chametz, because it doesn't do, in other words, one molecule of like yeast can, set everything in fire. But it's not going to do anything to applesauce. So, that's why I thought we're talking about distinguishing between, in other words, kelim shenishtamshu behen chametz b'tzonen. So a regular kli, your soup bowl, you could use to make matzah dough, but you can't use your kli for making starter dough to make matzah dough.
No, but I think the difference is that the Beit Seor. The problem of chimutz kasher, I think, with the Beit Seor is that because you are making your usual dough in there, it's much more doughy and chametz-y than other things. It's not as much about. I don't disagree that we're potentially talking about making matzah dough in this, but I think the ikar of the issue with the Beit Seor is not about what's happening with your matzah when you're making it or whatever, but that because you usually make your bread, like there's a cabinet in which I usually, like when I'm making dough, I put it there for it to rise, and that cabinet smells like bread the entire year. Like that's how that works. The Beit Seor, where your bread is leavening, where your dough is leavening, it's like the chimutz kasher. It's more chametzi than something that you've just kind of stam had chametz in bitzonen.
You're more machmir than I am.
I agree on the whole thing, except for the English usage of doughy or chametzi, which usually that EY is used to refer to something less than something more. Lexi, so that's my only disagreement with you.
I think that's just a linguistic thing. I mean, chametz, like, as it is very deeply chametz essency.
It is the most chametz.
I know,
thing.
but I don't think you use.
Would you prefer I use chametz dick or?
I'm not sure. Although using that, then Lexi would mean less than Lex. So I canceled it. I'm sorry. Didn't hurt me now. I didn't prepare it.
That's why you like law, right, Lexi?
Yeah. But I think that one of the questions we're going to have there then too is also, is the Beit Seor fixed? We don't get into this directly, but like, is this a question of just, it's so chametz-stick that it just always has chametz in there and it's like uncleanable? Or is it a case where it just has such a strong identity of chametz almost that we're afraid of it? And that's going to be maybe a difference there as well.
And it goes also back to the language in the end of the Gemara about both about charoset, Beit charoset, and both about those agnei de mechoza. That it sounds like we're talking about something close to charifa, like meaning it is chametz because it is so potently chametz that it simply transfers. It's like really like sikina charifa. We're talking here about really. In charoset, it's clear that we're not sure exactly what charoset is for at their times, but it's something with tavlin, and it's something that possibly has chametz in during the year. People probably do eat charoset during the year at their times, and it's a chametz charoset. And because it is both very potently spicy and chametz, so using this kli in Pesach is making automatically, even though the kli it's cold and the finger putting it in it's cold, it's transferring.
Good, yeah.
And also I want to say, so there is the whole process how you make this. It's like sourdough, right? Like if you make bread, so it takes some time. I don't know. It sits there for several days, I assume, right? It's And so it's closer to the whole concept of kavush or something like which is there for a very long time.
I'm sorry for hacking.
No, please. Yeah, this is great.
But charosas is also considered a refuah. For some, that's the whole purpose of it. So therefore, it's medicinal. Therefore, for sure, it's something very strong.
Yeah. So I also like the idea here of like this idea of you have something that's very big, right? So the Gemara rejects it, right? But it's like a really wide plate or something like that air gets to flow through, right? Would stop B'liyah. And then we reject it. It's also very parsha dik with the lechem hapanim, which seem to like be made to have air flow through it and keep it from going stale. Okay, that's just, I had to get that comment in. I want to stop the share for the moment. Let's go to the tour. So other side of your book, it's Sadi Aleph Seif Bet. If you have Seifim, if you don't have Seifim, starting with Katav Bal Ha'itur. Maybe let's see. Alan, can you read for us?
Yeah, okay, I got it. Ko mide de bayadacha. Kegan lahaniach basar hater tzanen bakara shel eser tzanen. Aser lechachila dilma acha belahadacha. Bedavka mevushal zelav orche bayadacha. Aval mide de orche bayadacha kegan basar chai ukiyatabash shar lechachila. Okay, so anything that needs dacha, like putting cold heter meat and a cold iser dish of dairy is also lechachila to do, because maybe you might come to eat it without the dacha.
Yeah, and just two things. First off, right, I want to be very particular. It's the ke'ara, right? There may not be anything in the ke'ara. We're talking about just like the plate itself, probably. Although I guess there are probably ways you could understand it otherwise, but I think that's really what he means. Yes. And it's cheli sur. Dairy would also potentially be a problem, but here he's talking about that it's an isur, like a plate, the non-Jewish plate, shall we say, that you now own. So, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, Isur stam. Right, because you might come to either without the hadacha, but this is specifically for foods, a cooked food, a cooked food that you would not normally wash. Cooked foods, you don't normally wash them, but something that you would normally wash, like raw meat or anything like that, it's fine.
Exactly. I made fish for Shabbos. Before I made the fish, I washed it off. Right. That's, if I had put that on a non-kosher plate, that would seem to be fine. But if I did it after the fish was cooked, where I'm not going to wash the fish, I don't want to get rid of my nice, spices I put on it, then that would be problematic. Right? Why? What's problematic about this? It's a plate. Why do I care? Okay, good.
Could the plate have potentially absorbed some Isser Fam at some point?
It did.
Right.
Okay. So
could have. Right.
Let's say I know it absorbed Isser Fam, right? So what? Not cooking on the plate, right? With that, we're gonna. You don't have to answer unless you have one like at the tip of your fingers already.
I mean, unless you think it's a cliff, you hold Hanan for Kliferes, it's a Kliferes plate, and the kara itself is an issue, then you may have an issue. But that's
exactly not. That's a possibility, right? So actually, with that, I want to look at the Darchei Moshe. This is Aleph. But by the way, as a very quick side note, I only learned this week that we have the Darchei Moshe Hakatzar Hamushlam, according to which is only 2/3 of the original Darchei Moshe. That's in our book. More to say about that another time. But so this is, if you ever wonder, if you ever compare the Shirat Devorah one to another one, it won't be quite the same. So people should just be aware of that. So if you don't have a Shirat Devorah, hopefully it will be the same here. Okay, so I'm going to read this one. This is Darchei Moshe Tzadi Aleph, Sif Katan Aleph. V'yesh lakshot, right? Dehamrinim aper kol sha'a, kli shenishtamesh bo chametz, right? And then I have in parentheses v'yesh korsin tzonen, right? I don't necessarily know that he does. He's gores that automatically. Mishtamesh bo matzah. V'chein katav Tur Orach Chaim Siman Taf Nun Aleph. Im ken shma mina d'mutar lishtamesh betzonen bichli isur. Afal gav delo yadichu levasof. Right. He says this is a problem. Where did he get this? We have a rule. It's paskin in the Tur. The Tur is right, who's writing out the Bali Tur here, right? About matzah, that matzah can be used in a chametz dish, right? What use means is a big question, right? But that sounds like you don't need to do hadacha at the end. But so he's got to reconcile this. L'chen nireli delo asur lishtamesh bo ela basar ucheyat sebo diipe lachluchit. Aval devar yavesh kigon matzah bichli chametz share. All right, so this is his first suggestion. He says maybe the difference is if I use something that is wet versus something that's dry. Matzah is dry, which there it sounds like he's not talking about the matzah making process, but rather matzah after it's been made. Right, that is, even though it's probably not like our matzah, which is really, really dry, but it's still a generally dry substance. Versus putting basar, which is a wet substance, and that somehow has an issue. We'll have to wonder what that issue is. Okay, but that needs investigation. Right? Maybe it's possible to chametz is different from other isurim. Right? He doesn't actually explain why. But here's another suggestion. Yesh lechalek bein davar shebala isur bechamim, az asur lishtamesh bo tzonen, kediita lekaman siman kuf kaf aleph. Aval davar shemishtamshim bo isur tzonen, mutar laniach bo heter tzonen, dum yedeh chametz umatzah. Right? He says, well, maybe he doesn't have the girsa of kli shemishtemesh bo chametz tzonen. Just maybe for things. Or maybe he does, but things that are used for sonen only, then you can do it. But if it's used for cham, that's a problem. So, okay. Go ahead.
Joe, so how do you answer the question that you posed to me? Who cares if it observed it?
He doesn't. That's the whole thing. I don't think he actually fully answers it. There's something happens when it's lach that seems to be problematic in a way that that is not it's just surprising, right? That just because I put something with some liquid in it, it has some interaction with this bowl that's problematic. I don't know. So I have a thought, but I'll give it to you and let me finish it up and
actually,
go for it.
I think Alan was commenting more on the cham tzonen thing, right? That I do think there is something honestly slightly more intuitive about the fact that something like with moisture and liquid interacts slightly differently with the containers that it's put in than something that's just totally dry and not sticking to it at all, not whatever. But whether something absorbed bilach or becham or betzonen, if you're putting something on it betzonen, there's no heat to be mafli. It's who cares how it absorbed or it absorbed? That shouldn't actually change how it's able to give flavor, provided it's clean.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only one that I've come up with for that is really an identity thing, right? That the kli takes on some identity if it's used with hot, because it really absorbs the isur flavor, or really absorb, and that, or maybe even absorbs the chametz flavor, and that's a problem from an identity thing. But I hopefully somebody else, I'll tell you, the Shach is going to reject all of this, right? He does not like it. I mean, he's going to really just get rid of it, even though we're going to see it paskin in the Shulchan Aruch. We'll see how much of the Shach we have time to see. But it's confusing. It's a little weird. So I don't know. Anybody else have a thought? I just want to finish up the Derech Moshe. He says, Nireli Ikar. Right, he thinks he thinks that the one about whether it's been used for cham or tzonen in the past is really the main answer. All right, so and he says, he ends by en lael, right? Look, back in the Siman that we didn't do, the mutar lechol tzonen below hadacha bichli shemochin bo. Right, if you salt it in the kli, that you can put something tzonen in it without any hadacha. Right. So, okay. At least I want to see what my plan was. Any thoughts before we go on from this?
I have a thought.
Yeah, please.
Teretz.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just just wild roots would be that first of all, it's only the problem is the Bala Itter. Why did the Bala Itter say this, right?
Yeah.
Didn't have the Bala Itter, we wouldn't say this. So we would just have, we'd say it's mutter. It's not like there's a Gemara. It's not like two Gemaras that contradict. And I could answer the Gemaras, and I could answer this Gemara and say that by matzah, we're assuming that obviously he cleaned all his dishes before Pesach. So we're assuming that the dishes have been well cleaned. And when we said it's mutter to use them with chametz, we meant after he cleaned them. Well, whereas when the Bal Itter is talking about a case where normal usage, where people don't necessarily clean their plates so well.
So good. And that's going to be one of the suggestions that comes up, that this is just about dirty dishes, right? That people just don't clean their dishes all that well. And we're worried that the dish has some, some residue still in it. That's an actual food, right? It makes the food clean interaction turn into a food interaction, essentially. So Sarah.
This is just another wild idea. Is it possible that having used it for hot things in the past might mean that you would be more likely to, even if what you're doing right now is sonen, that in the future you might come to use it for hot things again, and so it's a sort of zera atu that you do it with hot things?
Yeah, I thought about that. It does, right? The idea here is that there's a fear that oh, well, I use this bowl with milk, this meat bowl, I use it with milk. I eat ice cream in it sometimes. Oh, I use it with milk sometimes. And then you just get confused, right? And you're going to come to...
And you're going to do that more with things that that withstand heat, right? That or withstand putting hot stuff in them, as opposed to things that you never put things in.
It's because it can be used with chamin, right?
Yeah, and because you have in the past, right? You're more likely to do that with, I don't know, a bowl rather than a cutting board or something.
Yeah.
It's good to have one from student.
Yeah, it's there is something to this,
but it makes sense. The paranoia makes sense, right? Makes sense.
So it does. Rav Lennis, and I don't need to direct this to you, but this because something you talk about all the time is public policy, right? The Bali tour might just be public policy. It's the meat side of your kitchen should stay the meat side of your kitchen. The milk side should stay the milk side. There's some crossing that if you need to can do with stuff that's only used for cold stuff, but that's as far as I want you to go, right? And which, by the way, the Bali.
I do think there is something to the identity one, though, also that you've been talking about, especially given the examples that we have for the chametz, right? Again, with the bits or and the things like that, where on the one hand, yes, it's when you're fermenting things, that also does tend to leave a pretty strong scent and flavor behind. And on the other hand, it's also this is my this is my leavening bowl, this is my kneading bowl, right? The idea of that is the most paradigmatic chametz stick thing that you can think of, right? That whole cabinet, I just think of as that's my bread cabinet, right? So I was I'm not gonna, I'm sure if I extensively sprayed it down with soap for a long period of time, it wouldn't smell like that. But I just you associate it so inextricably with that thing, right? And that the more you've used it for that thing, the more you've cooked that thing in it, the more it's going to be associated with that isser or with basar or chalav, as opposed to this is a container that I've placed X in before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's and that I think for some people it's going to be very problematic. If they're well, kli cheres I can figure it out, but it's hard to say that a kli has the same identity as food. But I think you might be right. Maybe that's what's going on. And there is a shach. Where is it? I think we haven't seen it yet. And sorry, I don't remember.
I think it's near the end.
Yeah, where he says, he actually goes on this whole thing of even in cases where you can cross kalim, you shouldn't do it. Right? It's kalim need to keep their identity. Now, which kalim he's talking about here is an interesting question too. And okay, good. I want to look through the Shulchan Aruch on this just so we can see it. And maybe I'll read that, and then maybe Rav Lexi will do us the pleasure of reading some parts of the shach. We're not going to do the whole thing, unfortunately. It's such a good shach. I started trying to actually section it out a little bit, but it's all right. So let's go to the Shulchan Aruch Sadi Aleph, Seif Bet. I'll read. Kol midei debaya hadacha kegon laniach basar heter sonen bekara shel isur sonen. Right, he brings the Itur's case, the Bali Itur's case. Does anything that requires hadacha, like putting a kosher meat that's cold on a plate of an Isur plate that's also cold. Asur lechachila dimachil below hadacha. That's asur because you might come to eat it without doing hadacha. V'davka mevushal dilav orche b'hadacha. But we're only talking about cooked meat where you don't normally wash it off. But if it's something that you're going to wash off anyway, or that's a normal manner to wash it off, right? Then it's permitted lechatchila. And the Rama says the davka davar sheyesh bo lachluchit kitzah. We're going to see how he paskins his own, what he copies from Darchei Moshe. Aval davar yavesh mamash im lo bala kli rak betzonen. He combines the two, right? He says we're only talking about something that has some moisture, some wetness. But if it's something that's completely dry, right? If the kli never absorbed or only absorbed, let me put it at sonen, cold stuff, you can put dry stuff in it without any hadacha. Right, so he requires that it both be a completely dry food, and that the kli never absorbed chamim. So, and then he permits it.
Unless you give it a test.
Unless you're going to wash it off, right? Sorry, great points, very good point, right? So unless you're going to do hadacha, and it seems to be, or we're not going to.
I was saying that Taz points out here that he thinks it's fair.
In the Darchei Moshe, you mean?
In the Taz.
Yeah, I mean, he thinks that the not the Darchei Moshe, the Rama is.
The Haggah is making he meant to say either or, not both of these.
Yeah, it's weird. This is because the Darchei Moshe. Actually, I have that bunch of. Did I want to do a piece of that? I think we're not going to do it for now. But yeah, it was a little weird that he seems to have combined, right, what he seemed to be two different shitot in the Darchei Moshe, and only the second one, which he said was, Kenirei Ikar, and now all of a sudden he's required both of them. So, okay, good. So let's take a look at the Shach a little bit here. How are we doing on time? Yeah, I think we can do a little bit. Let's see, where do I want to start? I just like a little background on some things the Shach does here. Right, he says he actually brings a bunch of counterproofs. He talks about you're putting things that are harif in a non-kosher plate, and he talks about a thing where actually we haven't seen yet. But if I accidentally have a meat a pot that I use for halav, right, that I can put apples in it afterwards, right? That doesn't seem to be a problem, right? And there's so many counter cases to all of this that just it doesn't make sense in kind of the world that we've been living of Isser v'Heter up until now. And so I wanted to start. Where did I want to start? Way down. But maybe let's see. What's a good place to find? Yeah. Okay. Maybe the way I have it, although I think there's different versions of the Shirat Devorah that people have, but in mine, it's like the third wine line in the second column of the Shach. And it comes right after a parenthetical, which is kind of helpful. And the parenthetical ends with Beit Seor v'charoset mutar kvar sham ayen sham. And then it says Umashma dila datam. People give me some thumbs. All right. Good. And I will quote before we get there. Earlier up when he's talking about the Rama, he says, Zehu darko shel Rav aval kol derav michilatan ve'ad sofan einam muvanim li. Right? None of it makes any sense to me. Right? So that's where he's sitting right now. Lexi, you want to go ahead.
Tell me again where you were.
It's after a parenthetical. The parentheses ends with de'afilu beit seor v'charoset mutar kvar sham ayen sham, and then it says umash when the parentheses close umashma diladatam dehu adin.
I don't know if you have the Shirat Devorah. Some of them have a little finger like this next to the umashma.
Ooh, really? Oh.
Yeah.
That's not my version, but apparently whoever wrote that agreed with me that was an important place. I think so. It's
yeah, the little bigger guys are useful. Okay. Umashma the datam zehu adin im nivla chametz b'chamin demutar lishtamesh ben matzah betzonen demali nivla al yedei tzonen or al yedei chamin. right? This is what we were saying earlier, that like according to the data of various people he has just quoted, it appears that like actually, regardless of whether something is absorbed chametz with cold or heat, that it should be fine to use cold matzah in it, because like, what do I care how it absorbs the chametz? V'adarabba harosh sham hevi machloket haposkim diyesh savrim de beit or v'charoset afilu hagala lo mahane apalkav delishar kelim shnishtamshu behem b'chamin pshit delekule alma mahane hagala. Right. On the contrary, like whatever, the Rosh is bringing this question of like, oh, maybe with the Beit Seor and Beit Charoset, in order to use like matzah bechamin in them, you maybe even Hagala wouldn't work, right? As opposed to all these other things where Hagala clearly does work. Va'afalkav the b'shas b'masechet avodat kachavim mechalek zeh tashmisho bechamin v'zeh tashmisho b'tzonen haynu shtamesh behen heter chamin ukavush v'kayotze bo. Right, and again, even though like he's like, yeah, the Shas does make a distinction between when things have absorbed bechal or bitzonen, that's to then use the thing now, bitzonen versus becham. That when you're trying to cook in it, again, then there is a distinction as to whether it's absorbed something, bitzonen or becham, or when you're trying to do like kavush, which again, as we know, has like cooking properties. But that if you're just like purely setting something down cold in it, there's no distinction made in the Shas as to whether it absorbs something hot or cold. V'chein mevu'ar b'ram b'per kol sha'ad afilu nishtamesh behen chametz b'chamin mutar lishtamesh behen matzah b'tzonen. Right, so this is clear in the Ran. V'chein mashma b'hedya b'sefer Truma u'b'shari Yoreh Siman perkei b'smag lavin sheviu raya l'kelim shmitpashel. Right, and then we also have the idea of like something where it has basar v'chalav has been used in it. Again, we say that you can like set things in it, but sonen. Same thing with like a yain nesach kli that we say you can put things in, right? Even though it's like yain nesach and basar v'chalav are both asar v'hana, nonetheless, we don't care. Like it's if you want to put something in it cold. We just don't really think that there is a meaningful interaction that happens there. The feeling mishtamish b'kli davar isor b'chamin mutar la'achol bo achar kach tzonen lach v'lo hadachak klal lo hakli v'lo hamachal ela shemekaneach hakli ayin shem. Right, in the Rashba, it also seems that again you can use a kli that there has been iser in, whether b'tzonen or b'cham, you can eat like cold heter out of even like lach, like moist cold heter, provided you've like washed the kli before. So there's no like, again, like physical remnants or whatever was in it prior, but that you don't need to like do hadacha on the food that was set in it before you can eat it.
I want you to skip a little bit. So there's the next parentheses, and then you should have right after v'gam b'ma shechilek b'darchei Moshe.
Yeah. V'gam b'ma shechilek b'darchei Moshe ben heter lach le'avish lo yatsa yedei chovat bi'or hadvarim. Did not explain this sufficiently.
Yeah.
Sheharei harashba sham matir lehedya lechol batzonen lech and sham. Right. The Rashba explicitly said you could have like a moist cold thing in it, and that's fine. So this gets to what Rav Nachman was talking about. Yeah. Right, that like they mentioned the possibility of like needing dough for matzah and these things, and the only reason they said not to was because they were worried about it like leavening faster. But it says nothing about that that's a case of like lach, it's like sticky and moist or whatever, and didn't mention that as the issue, implying that like if there was no leavening concern, it would also be fine.
Yeah, for instance, I just want to like, for instance, if I wanted to make my non-Pesach bread, like it's ER, and I wanted to make bread in that bowl, right, in a bowl of like a non-Jewish bowl, there would be no problem with it, right? That's so okay, good, and keep going. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, someone just said something.
Yeah, are we talking about any bowl, or would this apply to Kli Charetz as well?
Well, that comes up.
Yeah, it does. I don't know if we're going to get to it, but it's for the moment he hasn't distinguished, right? And there's a place where he says he doesn't want to distinguish. He doesn't think there's a distinction. So
right, that's crossed up in that point. So
yeah. So, but okay, just go on a little bit more, Lexi, and then we're going to probably unfortunately have to close this down, this part down because it's so good. But it's
אבל באמת נראה לי, מה שכתב האורחות חיים, כלים של עובד כוכבים שהודחו יפה, היינו דינן שהודחו יפה, כגון שהדיחם ישראל עכשיו, ואין רוצה לומר דווקא הדחה בעינן, האורחות חיים כתב כן בשם הרעה, ורעה ספירה לה בספר בדק הבית, שהכינוח יפה הוא בכל מקום כהדחה, אין שם. So this is just talking about like, okay, like things should be cleaned well before being used, right? Essentially, like, this is not talking about doing hadacha after things are placed in one another. It's just about like cleaning stuff before you place anything in it.
Exactly.
Is this an
it's Bal Ha'it.
Bal Ha'itor, right? I forget. Ubal
Yeah.
Ha'itor Maire below kinuach. Devadai im kinach hakli beinyan she'en bo shamnunit klal. In Svar Klala Hatricho Hadecha, the Halona Gabi Isor, Umashalabo, and Umaflit Betonen. He's like the Bala.
That's the line to underline. That's the line to underline. No?
Yeah. This is
that's
the line.
Yeah. So
you're right. The Baal HaYitor must be referring to a case where it just like we are dealing with kalim that have not been sufficiently cleaned, because if not, there is literally just no reason to be worried because everything is tzonen. We don't have flavor transfer but tzonen. And if there is no isser like ba'ayin there, right, then the kind of issue that we talked about with like the meat and cheese wrapped up together where you get some of your like meatiness in the outside or cheese in the outside, that doesn't even happen here because there's literally nothing, right? So it's like if it's washed correctly, there is just no concern.
Exactly. I'm going to stop you there.
That's the chiluk. Yeah. The Gemara is talking about clean vessels and the Baal Hitter is talking about, he's not learning it from the Gemara. He's just telling you a din that if it's dirty,
you have to say that. I mean, because it seems the Gemara has a default position that things are clean.
Exactly. Well, this is a big question. Stam kelim shel akum, are they clean or are they not clean? This is a discussion. This is kind of a machloket.
Right.
So good. Right. So I just want to say, like, the takeaway, and thanks, Rav Lexi, for reading that. Right, is he says, look. The way that's been talked in the Shulchan Aruch missed what the Bali Torah was saying, right? He said, well, the Bali Torah was, and the Darkei Moshe trying to explain it, missed it. What the Bali Torah was trying to say was that there are dirty kalim out there, and we maybe even assume that kalim are dirty, and so if you put your your kosher thing on a non-kosher cold dish, you assume that there's like some residue there, or maybe you didn't know that it was wiped off. Maybe a Jew didn't wipe it off, right? And then there's a problem, of course, because that follows the entire law we've been talking about here, right? Is that when you don't want, milk and meat to touch each other, or kosher and non-kosher food to touch each other when they're cold. But if that's, if the thing is very clean, there's no problem. However, I do want to say that even though he's kind of wiped out, no pun intended, washed away Sif Bet, there is, I think, something very powerful there in terms of, an instinct of trying to keep, like we said before, trying to keep these things very separate, a very from instinct. And if someone ever comes to you and says, oh my gosh, I can't believe you put that that cold, kosher food on a non-kosher plate, we have to do something about it, right? Like, there is like a real instinct that I think the Shulchan Aruch is playing out there a little bit. Maybe you have to do hadacha. Like, I understand that, even though like mimikar adin, it doesn't really seem like you have to do that. So, okay. Any final comments on that before we move on? This is Rav Nachum challenged me many years ago to find all the places where we don't paskin like the Shulchan Aruch, and this seems to be a major one of them. It's I found one, Rav Nachum. So with that, let's take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to look at Gimel and Daled. We're really going to kind of go back into Tata Gavar, and I have a big thing on that too that I want to do. So. All right, let's come back. Maybe I only give people 4 minutes. We're going to revisit our old friend Tata Gavar, which is an old friend. Let's see. All right, we're going to start here. I'll share my screen.
Joel, I'm not sure I agree with you. Why do you say we don't paskin like this? We do.
We don't paskin like we don't paskin like the shulchan. We paskin like we do in the sense of the thing being clean. But if I have a clean isur kli and I put my cold kosher food on it, that there's no problem.
But
you disagree?
Do that.
Yeah, you think that even if I know it was clean, I shouldn't do it?
Right, you saw. Where'd you see that we don't paskin?
I don't know. It seems to me that the shach seems to wipe it out, right? He seems to think that there's really no sense to this, and that the only thing is a question of cleanliness.
Yeah, but if you look at the Magen Avraham, I don't think that we necessarily go like that, shach.
Oh, you think that we go against it? Okay, that's I didn't look at the Magen Avraham, so.
Yeah, I think we do. L'chatchila, you shouldn't be using kalim even for cold of non-kosher kalim.
Not kosher. Okay, so that's in Kufnin.
I don't think we do paskin that way. I feel like I even also just like experientially, I feel like most spaces that I've been referred to cold contact in like both b'diavad and l'chatchila terms, right? As in like obviously,
yeah.
Look, if you have like a bunch of kosher kalim that you could put something in, probably everyone would say you should go with that instead of a non-kosher one. But like, I think if you asked almost anyone today, like, can I set my brownie down on this completely clean bowl from this non-Jew's house? They'd say, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could say that the bowl was never, right, really, you don't cook in bowls, right?
Okay, this complete well, that already gets the Ramaz distinction. This completely clean pot in this non-Jew's house.
Well, even being in a non-Jew's house might be a b'diavad situation, you could argue.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a question of like if I'm staying in an Airbnb, right? I need somewhere to put my my food down. I'm not going to cook on it. I'm not going to, right? So
I feel like a really lechatchila situation is like, do you want to have? Are you going to have in your kitchen?
Well, if you look at the end of Taz bet.
Yeah, I was going to do Taz bet where he gets into herring. This is a great. I'll read this.
Yeah, but it's the last sentence. You're staying at a Gentile's house.
Yeah.
Then it's kiddy evid, and then you could do it. But that implies that if you're not at a bait of a goy, you shouldn't be using. You shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure how often it's going to come up if you're not in that situation, right? That's
well, we had Rabbi Strukasis outside Rebbe Yamori. He gave shir to this shir. I mean, the continuous share. And he said his father, was one of very many Jews who had to spend long, they was kind of a period of itinerant salesman, spend time in Goyim's house and cook in the house and figure it out, put things down. It was a normal Misa. And, I'm not continuing exactly the same thing. I spend time with a lot of Jews who are glatt treif. And sometimes, Cheryl and I, we have to do a chasana. It's a destination chasana. Going to a place that there's nothing that's kosher and anything we bring in. And I'm trying to figure out, where am I going to set things down? So where am I going to set down? I'm going to set it down on things that are clean, things that are made out of, all the heterim that can, because you fall in that situation. So anyway, but he says, well, if Rabbi would do it in the way that he would do it. What's the thing? We did this all the time. Sometimes he would travel with his didn't travel with his father, but something like that. Okay, I'm sorry, I gave him.
So no, I think I just because I actually had it as on the plan, and maybe it's worth just taking a. Everyone should look at the Taz Bet where he does. I'll read the beginning of it. I just want to just right. Lo yafet, right? Ulfiza lo yafet osina olchei drachim shochlin herrings mluchim al kli akutim sharet tzarich hadacha achar shemunach alehem. Right? He says. So he actually does seem to paskin like it. Right? He says people who put their herring on on non-Jewish vessels, right? You need to do hadacha, right? So
just to be clear, this is the Taz quoting the Maharshal.
Yes, yeah, but he seems to paskin like it, right? He's because at the end, right, he says, we go through, right? He says,
but it's salted. That's the whole point, right? So it's not really tzoneh.
No, it has to be salted in a way you can't eat it for it to be a problem in terms of like you're talking about like because salt is
but
hot.
he's describing.
But that's a machoket. I mean, it might be.
Yeah, herring molchin al kli akutim. I assume that you were salting the herring, like to preserve it.
I mean, in both cases he's got herring and then pickles, right? I don't know the Yiddish.
Okra.
Interesting. Interesting. I looked it up actually on Google Translate. It said cucumber.
It's like gurke. It's like gurke or gurke. That's the cucumber.
Right. So okay.
Gurka is a pickle, in Russian.
Okra.
It's even if it's just kavush, isn't that enough to say that it's different than the straightforward case of putting tzoneh on a clean plate?
Cucumbers.
No, it'd be interesting. That'd be interesting.
Pickled cucumbers, I think.
Yeah.
It's
exactly.
in brine.
Right, and we'll see this later. But doesn't Rabbeinu Tam hope that any malicha that would be like fit for kara is considered?
No, but it's malicha through a pot, which they clarify. We'll get into that, but is like eino ne'achal. That's different than like a salty pickle.
So maybe I'll say that now, and we'll hopefully get into it later. Right? There's really I think three types of malicha, right, that we deal with is malicha litzli, malicha lekara, which lekara is to do bishul on, which that's like really to draw all the blood out, and then malicha lederach, right, which is to salt something to preserve it for the road, which seems to be the most salted you can get actually. So we'll see. Yavni, go for it, and then I'll
just to be clear, in this case, the reason why we're concerned with the dish that you're eating it off of, as opposed to the wherever, because they were the ones doing the pickling too, wherever they're doing the pickling, is because presumably they're doing the pickling in vessels that they only use for pickling this herring.
Yeah. So the second case might be right that they're buying them from the non-Jews, and maybe who knows what the dish is used for. But the first case is just a case of you brought your herring with you and you're putting it on their plates, right? So that one seems to be a case that we might think would be more makil about. So okay, I'm gonna. It's a great
herring
point.
For a yid is like drinking water.
It's very fair.
I mean, the guy pours out water in a stripe because we don't drink goyish water. They lived on herring. I live on herring. I had herring for dinner.
But
I actually did have herring for dinner.
A Jewish wife. I had a Jewish wife.
But I've been at herring since Shabbos, so I'm. But all right. I want to no. So maybe Sarich on my part. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll look at them again, Abraham, about whether or not we paskin the way that I think the Shach was pushing us, which was that this is actually not a problem even lechatchila. But surely, by the way, it's not, and we saw it's definitely not a problem lechatchila if you know you're going to wash it, right? That's for sure not a problem, even in all the understandings of the Torah. So, okay. I just want to read Gimel in the Shulchan Aruch, and then I want to move on to Daled. So Gimel, Tzarich li zaher shelo yiga basar balechem, she'im yiga bo asur leochlo im gevina, v'chein zaher shelo yiga bo gevina, she'im yiga bo asur leochlo im basar. So bread, which is like, I talked about the two different sides of the kitchen, the basar, I don't know if they actually have that in their world, but right, the basar and the halav sides, the space in between them is the lechem, the thing that you use to eat with everything, right? We'll see this later, that you're not allowed to make your bread milky. You're not allowed to bake milky bread or meaty bread with exceptions. It's like it's not there are exceptions to that. And so also the same thing is like, be very careful. Don't, you're eating your bread, don't touch your cheese to it, because then you may come to eat that bread with basar, and now you've eaten basar and gvina together. So pretty straightforward, I think, that rule. That's all I had to say about that. The shotgun says that you might forget, right? Yeah, Yavni.
Although the phrasing is a little strange, because you could read this and think that I can never make a sandwich with meat or cheese.
Yes. Yeah, I think number one, I don't think sandwiches exist in their role. If you cut off the piece, like that's fine. But second of all, we've seen this before, right? Because we saw this in the separation on the table, like what can separate between someone eating meat and milk. There's a sense that like there's just like a loaf of bread that sits on the table at all times, right? And then you pick from it, and that's and then you use that bread to scoop up your food. So that's the concern there. This is similar, I think, not so far off from when we said, when you eat cheese, you should wash your hands well or make sure there's no shamnunit on them before you go and eat meat, right? It's the same idea, is that you have to make sure your bread doesn't have gvina or basar on it.
Right, right. I'm just pointing out that you're reading like bread is the loaf of bread, as opposed to like you said, like if you cut it off, it doesn't count as bread anymore. It's not the lechem that is being referred to.
Yeah, clearly you can, you're permitted to.
It's about something that be left over, right? Like something that, like, if you're sandwich, they're going to do, then you're just going to eat this now and finish it. It's fine. It's just like if it's something that's going to remain after it's touched.
Yeah. So maybe actually, since that, just to take a look at Shach Daled. I'll read one more time. Hope people don't get tired of my voice here. Right, she'im yigabo asur leochlo im gvina. Right, so if it touches, you can't eat with the meat. Below hadacha. Right, so you could wash it off, or essentially you could also just take a slice off the bread. Right, klipa is even better than hadacha. Vechashina dilma ishtale ve'achil below hadacha. We're afraid you're going to forget and you're going to eat it without doing hadacha. And this, I don't know if we push this point, so maybe I'll add this. Basif katan aleph dedavka keshechad mehem lach ayen sham. Right, it actually has to be a case where one of them is wet. Right, two dry foods interacting with each other is generally not seen as a problem. So it's kind of been in the background of all of this, but I haven't said it out. So now I get to say it out. So, okay, I want to push this because Tata Gavar awaits us. Very important topic, which we've done before, but we're going to see it again in Basar Bechalav. So let me share my screen. And let's see. Anybody not read who wants to read? Alish, have you read?
Oh, I can do it. Sure.
Great. All right. Starting right here, the Talmud Bavli in Pesachim.
Okay. I'll open it. Okay, I'll use the screen. Wait, it's too small. Okay, good. Was it Bavli Pesachim? Wait a minute. I'm going there. Wait, where is it on the sheet?
It's on page. Hold on. It's under Steve Daled, and I don't.
No, I'm just looking at the source sheet. Oh no, it's before Noda Behuda, right?
Yeah, it's long before the Noda Behuda. So.
Long before Noda. Okay, I have it. Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Itmar.
Yeah.
Cham letoch cham divrei hakol asur. Tzonen letoch tzonen divrei hakol mutar. Cham letoch tzonen vetzonen letoch cham. Rav amar ila gavar u'Shmuel amar tata gavar. Okay, so it was said if it's hot and hot, everybody says it's forbidden. Both cold, everybody says it's mutar. But if it's hot into cold and cold into hot, so Rav says Ila Gavar, the upper one, is decisive, and Shmuel says the one which is on the bottom.
Good. I want to pause you because I like the way you translate that. I mean, gavar means overpowers, but here it decides which is it a hot interaction or a cold interaction, right? It is about the upper substance, what its heat is, and Shmuel says about the lower substance. So okay. Keep going.
Tanya Kavatei di Shmuel. So we have a Braita which says the same thing like Shmuel cham letoch cham asur. V'chen tzonen shenatan letoch cham asur. חם לתוך צונן וצונן לתוך צונן מדיח, חם לתוך צונן מדיח. Okay, I'll translate it. Okay, so that's the right Ham. If I put Ham into Ham, so it's forbidden. Tzonen in the Ham, it's also forbidden because the Ham is on the bottom, and it's well Ham letoch Tzonen, and Tzonen letoch Tzonen is Madiach, Mediach. You have to wash it, like if the cases are like hot into cold and cold into cold. Even cold into cold is hadacha. Okay. Cham letoch tzonen madiach. So
good. I should ask that with exasperation. Cham letoch tzonen madiach, right? You drop something hot into something cold. All you do is wash it off. Keep going.
Kevan decham hu ademikarlei. So because when the hot thing goes into the cold one, so it gets colder, like it and it's impossible that it absorbs something from the forbidden part.
Impossible. I think you said it's impossible that it didn't absorb a little bit, right, from the yeah. So
yeah,
porta, right? It must have absorbed something,
right? Klipa mihaniv'e. So we should still want at least klipa, like the removal of the klipa. Ela ema, rather, I should say, cham letoch tzonen kolev. So we should read it. Cham letoch tzonen, you do klipa. Vetzonen letoch tzonen madiach, and tzonen into like the cold into cold is just hadacha. So that's how it the statement how the brayta should be read. Tanya idach, we got another brayta. Basar roteach shenafal letoch chalav roteach, vechen tzonen shenafal letoch cham asur. Cham letoch tzonen vetzonen letoch tzonen madiach. Cham letoch tzonen. Okay, that's it.
I'm going to stop you there. Okay. We know we're going to fix that brayta the same way we fixed the first one, right? Okay. So I just want to point out just so a couple of things here. So sonen letoch cham seems to follow Shmuel in both braytot, right? That it is that's asur, or like that has a full-on heat interaction, and cham letoch sonen, according to the way we fixed both braytot, requires klipa, right? Two braytot brought to support Shmuel here, and one seems to be about Isur v'heter, a tarovot condition, and one is a basar bechalav condition, right? So we have that you may have said, right, and we're not gonna have time to do the Tosfot that I brought, but why do you need two, right? That this is a case where you might have said that maybe it's different between tarovot and basar b'chalav, and here are the two different braytos to show us that actually it's the same rule for both of them, that Shmuel applies for both. And Alice, just while you're at it, right, normally just to remind people, we have a general principle that machloket Rav and Shmuel in Isura, that we follow Rav. However, and this is Isura, right?
Rashi. Okay.
However, read the Rashi, yeah.
Ushmuel Amar Tata Gavar Hilkach Cham letoch tzonen mutar vetzonen letoch cham asur ve'av al gav dehilcheta kerav be'isurei behai hilcheta keshmuel deha tania tartei matnitin kavatei delakaman. So in this case, we follow Shmuel because the Hatania Tartei, because we had these like two braytot which say the same thing, or
exactly, we have two braytot that are like him, right? So right. Not that they say the same thing, but,
I mean, like that follow Shmuel, like
exactly.
Right.
If you're at Amora and you can pull two braytot out that support you, right? I don't care what general principles we have about halacha, that's pretty powerful there. So. Okay, and they seem to be two braytot that are taught without machloket, right? There's not like you can't say it's a Tanaitic debate here. All right, good. Let me think. Yeah, actually, you know what? Let's do the Tosfot because there's actually another interesting principle there. I don't remember if I may have added this to the sheet later, so I apologize. But Jacob, I'm going to make you do it anyway. So,
question. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Is the idea then that Rav didn't know those braytot, or that he didn't agree, but they have more authority, or?
That's a great Achronish question, and I'm not gonna. Yeah, Rav Lexi, do you have a?
Yeah, just because we were talking about similar thing in another class recently, and I think that in all likelihood probably didn't know them. Like, obviously, there's a million different like academic theories about when different when the Tosefta was compiled and when different Baraitas are dated to, and like some Toseftas are really old, but also some Baraitas are much newer than some of the Mishnayot, and like it's certainly not impossible that Rav didn't know them, and it seems like it would be odd for him to have that position when the only Tanaic material that we seem to have explicitly supports Shmuel's and none of it seems to support him. So it feels like in all likelihood, probably he didn't know them. And probably neither did Shmuel, because it feels like Shmuel probably would have cited it if, isn't like, rather than just being like, this is my Chiddush, Tata Gavar, he probably would have been like, yeah, like that Baraita, which proves my opinion, Tata Gavar.
Especially when the Gemara sometimes calls it out a ton, right? It's right on the border there.
So good. Well, Rav and Shmuel, a little bit. They're early Amoraim, but I will also say, right, that the other problem that comes up with this, which we unfortunately will not get to today, both in the Noda Yehuda I gave you, the Aruch HaShulchan goes off on this a little bit, right? Is just have a non-Jew taste it and decide what the principle is, right? Like, why are we having an argument about this? Like, you can do a scientific test and show, and so it's a question that gets brought up in several Achronim. And there are different answers out there. It works very nicely. This actually maybe is a good chazara. It works really nicely per Rashi. Why? Anybody remember why it would work nicely per Rashi? What does Rashi say about a kfela tasting something?
It's only right. It's not sufficient.
Exactly. You still need shishim, right, for a kafela to taste something, and so therefore that's not sufficient to actually say that there isn't an isur here, and that they're talking about a case, right, where even if a kafela tastes it, is it still mutar or asur? The other one I saw was maybe it was the Aruch HaShulchan. I think he suggests that maybe something that only penetrates to a klipa, maybe a kafela couldn't tell for that, okay. Let's read the Tosfot though. Jacob, go ahead for the Tosfots here.
Tanya idach basar peach le tema had tu lamali lavia. So it's a big question. Like, why did we need to bring this further Braita? Lo merabinu tam de kmas milan da filu chalav shari. The afal gav de cham letoch zonin by klipa, but varsi achola so klipa, but avar de lo shayach klipa kamo v'chalav mutar. Nidalo ktani isura gabe chalav kidiktani klipa gabe basar. So Rabbeinu Tam says that it comes to teach us that even dairy is permitted, since
it's milk in particular here, right? Milk in particular.
Milk. Got it.
Mm-hmm. Hot meat falls into cold milk, right? Is the case here.
Because we'd still need klipa if klipa were possible, but if it's not possible, it's permitted. So, and that's something we didn't learn by milk.
Yeah. Good. In other words, well, let me just explain, right? If you look back at the Braita, right, it says, let's see if I can find it very quickly here. Right? But if we need a klipa, which is what the answer is, well, how can the chalav ever be permitted? Because you can't do klipa on chalav, right? Now, there's two possibilities here, right? And so one is the first Tosfot, which says, oh, that second Braita taught us that klipa is something that you do, but if you can't do it, okay, you did nicely. And actually, I think it's a very nice way of explaining that even though we fixed the Braita, the Stam Braita is like, yeah, if you can't do, the klipa is a chumrah and not actually mikar hadin. And the Riva says, no, how can the milk be permitted? Maybe there's just a lot of milk. And there's a 60-to-1 ratio against the klipa of milk that now has basar flavor in it. And so that's how it's permissible, right? So these are the two questions really of like, how do we understand this breita in order to understand klipa? Is klipa a chumra, and therefore if you can't do it, like it's, you know, the liquid, you can't do a klipa on a liquid, then it's just, you don't worry about it? Or is it a case of that klipa is mikar hadin, and the way it works with the liquid is that you need shishim against the whole thing?
I thought it was that you need shishim times what the klipa of the basar is, because the whole point is you don't know what a klipa of milk is. Like how much of the thing is a klipa. So how do you know you have 60 times it? So I was assuming that it's like 60 times whatever the klipa of the thing that contacted the liquid is.
I think would that not be the same thing initially, right? That there's a klipa on both ends that's kind of as thick. Is that or you think it's
unclear depending on how we understand the way that klipa would work with like liquids, right? So the way I think that we're measuring is whatever the klipa of the solid thing falling in is 60 times that ends up being.
Okay. Yeah, I assumed they were the same thing, but maybe that's Alan, sorry, go ahead.
Right, because in the Torah quotes they're saying would be from the basar, right?
No, because the milk also would, you know, if it were a solid, would get a klipa that was nesar on both, right? You get it on both sides. So I don't know. I didn't think about it that way. So unless someone has a good answer, but let's get into it a little bit and take a look. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Not as well as I'd like. So let's do it this way. Let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. And then, so I'll stop my screen share. Yeah, hopefully we'll have time to do everything. Let's see. Yavni, you want to read the Shulchan Aruch Daled?
בשר וחלב רותחין שנתערבו יחד, ואפילו בשר צונן לתוך חלב רותח, או חלב צונן לתוך בשר רותח, הכל אסור, משום דתת הגבר. אבל חלב רותח שנפל על בשר צונן, או בשר רותח שנפל לתוך חלב צונן, קולף הבשר, ושאר הבשר מותר. Yeah, should I stop there?
Stop there, yeah, because then we're going to get a pretty spicy thing in the Ramah in a second here. So,
so hot meat and milk that mixed, or cold, either of them that went onto hot cold either that went onto a hot of the other one, then the whole thing becomes forbidden because tata gavar. But if the hot one is on top, then one peels away the part of the meat that had the contact, and the rest of the meat is forbidden.
Good. Skip the Ramah for the moment. Go on. Keep going in the Mechaber.
Ve'im naflu ze letoch ze tzoranim mediach habasar. Yeah, sorry. והחלב מותר כולו, sorry. אם נפלו זה לתוך זה צוננים, מדיח הבשר ומותר. Oh, so in that case that we described, where the hot thing fell on the cold thing, then and you peeled away the part of the meat that had contact, all of the milk is permitted. And then the last case of if they're both cold, then you rinse off the meat and everything is permitted.
Right. This is kind of exactly, well, it's the Tosfot plus the Brightot we saw, right? Is essentially what we're seeing here. Good. Now go back and read that parenthetical in the Ramah, which is so important.
ובמקום שהבשר צריך קליפה, אם לא קלפוהו ובישלו כך, מותר בדיעבד. And if in any case where you're required to take off a klipa of the meat, if you didn't do that, but diavad, and you still cooked the whole and you cooked the whole meat with the klipa, then it's permitted. It's permitted.
Exactly. So great. Which is that's a little bit more, right? Because there it's similar to the milk, but we'll see in a second, right? Is there, if in the milk case it's mutar kulo, it must be because, right, klipa is just a chumrah, and so if you forgot to do klipa on the basar, that would be mutar too. I think that's the logic of the Rama. However, I want to look at the shach chet makom basar. Maybe Sarah, you want to read? You're on mute, though. Oh, okay. Sarah is not able to unmute right now. Raphael, you want to read the shachet?
Sure, I'm just looking for it just a second. I lost it for a second in my screen. מקום שבוסו. צורך עיון. דתויספויס פרק וכולו דף צדיבה ובית. דיבור המתחילים יש. ומביאם בסטיו יוסף סוף סימן קוף ורבינו יונה. רבינו יונה?
בשם רי, probably.
בשם רי, נכון. בשם רי, ומביאו בסטיו יוסף סוף סימן קוף ה' והגוס אושרי ומועריך בשם רי והמורדכי והאגודה כתבו שם דירך שנמלח בגיד הנושה ונסבע של צריך אחר כך שישים נגד הקליפו שנאסרה תחילה במליחה וכן כתב יגור סימן 1000 קע"ח בשם מריל על עוף שנתבשל בלא חתיכת ורידין שצריך שישים נגד הקליפה שנאסרה היא במליחה
שנאסרה תחילה במליחה, right?
Yes, ומביאו בסיוסף, בסימן כ"ב, סימן ד', בסתם, וכן הבח שם, וכן כתב הבח בפשיטות סימן י', סימן סעיף ה', גבי שחט בסכין של עובד כוכבים חולף.
Good.
So basically...
קורא בית השחיטה, right?
קורא בית השחיטה, בית השחיטה, זה אפילו דיעה ודסו. כן, והתבשין כדין כל בעשור. So basically he's bringing here a lot of cases and a lot of psakim that we have that we need shishim neged klipa, that we don't only need klipa, that's obvious, and that we need to take off all the like the perimeter that was affected by like shir belia, this kedei klipa, but we also need to have in what's left shishim neged klipa. If what would be mekulaf isn't batal b'shishim, the klipa wouldn't be enough.
Good. And these are all cases of sli and melicha, right? They're all cases of salting and roasting, which is going to be important. So,
but then we have also a case of bet hashchita that it's not dead and not dead. It's simply
exactly. So, okay. So keep going in the shach. ונראה דלקה אמר הרב.
ונראה דלקה אמר הרב, במקום שצריך קליפה ובישלו בלא קליפה, מותר בדיעבד, אלא דומיה דאחא דחלב מותר, מטעמא דכתבו התוספות והראש, ושאר פה הסכים דלא שייך בי קליפה. דהיינו שהוא דובור הנבלל, והקליפה נתערבה. וכי הגב אם יתבשל הבשר ולא יקליפה ונבלל בעניין דאינו מכירו דלא שייך בקליפה מותר בדיעבד. והשתניך דאלי כתב סתם מותר בדיעבד דאי מכירו אבל לפרש הקליפה. מיה ביי. דקליפה מיה ביי. So basically he's saying that it's because of the nature of the matter. Because we're speaking here about milk, and milk is a liquid, and even if it exists within this meat, is already nivlad, it's already completely mixed within the meat. It does not, we do not count it, and it's like a bit counterintuitive because like we're technically when we're thinking about klipa, the basic intuitive, we're trying to take out as much of the Yisra as possible. But what the chiddush of the shach here is the if lo mekiro.
Good. That's the important word there.
Doesn't really exist. It klipa. We because maybe klipa it's chumrah. Like that's the if going back to your question at the beginning of Shir, klipa here is clearly a chumrah, and it only exists for you not to eat isu be'ein, not to have actual, I don't know, chalav, if we would imagine it as a solid, to be there. So that would be matzrich klipa. But here, mutar below klipa, because lo mekiro.
Exactly. And in his case is right, the chalav, obviously it's mixed up, you can't do it. And once you've cooked this piece of meat, right, that klipa, the milky meat combination of the klipa gets mixed into the whole thing, right? But if it's a case where you know where the klipa is, you know that klipa is a sur, right, then that's your makiro and you have to take it, right? That's his distinction here. It's actually a little different distinction of saying, mi karadim ve'eno mi karadim. All right, but keep going.
Well, I just want to, before you go on, I want to clarify a little bit, because why is it that you are makiro and not makiro? In the case of the chicken, of the whole chicken, it's a large chicken. And so you know the klipa is the outside of the chicken.
Mm-hmm.
You know where it is. But in a case, so he's saying that he's making a kimta on he's limiting the Ramah. He's saying the Ramah is talking about a case where, let's say it's small pieces and they're mixed together in a pot. So you don't, maybe only some of them have klipa that's usher and some of them don't. So you don't know, you can't identify it. It's impossible to identify it because it's small. I think that's the distinction he's making.
I don't know. I mean, you need to shel basar below klipa, v'nivlal binyan de'eno makiro below sheyach klipa mutar b'diavad.
Right, binyan, that's the key word. Binyan de'lo makiro. Why don't you recognize it? Because it's mixed with other pieces, and you don't know which one is the klipa. And
I'm not sure. I understood it as not that you chopped it up and you don't understand it, but but rather once you actually do bishul on it, then the klipa gets mixed into the entire thing. And then there's no longer.
Well, what about the chicken? Isn't the chicken cooked?
Because it's sli, and in the case of sli, everything is going to the edge, right?
You're saying it's a distinction between sli and bishul?
Yeah. That's the way I understood it.
In the bishul case, that basically what happens is like what was previously only at the surface is now just like totally evenly distributed in such a way that you.
No, but it says
there's nothing specific you can cut off.
But it says al of shenit bashel below haticha v'ridin tzarich shishim. It's nit bashel. It's not sli.
I thought he meant lav dafka nit bashel. Of shenit bashel below hatichat v'ridim. But I thought neged klipa shenesrat tichla b'mlicha. Oh, interesting. So maybe I'm wrong. So.
I thought he was trying to say that there's different kinds of cooking. That's what I thought he was saying. That sometimes the cooking leaves the piece intact, and sometimes it causes it to be lost, and then you can't do klipa on it. I thought he was saying, don't think that the Ramah is saying any kind of bishul is going to do this. He's saying he's limiting it. He's saying no, it's only certain bishul where you lose the ability to identify the klipa, but not that all. He's not defining bishul as a thing which causes klipa to get lost, but rather he's saying those kinds of bishul that causes the klipa to get lost. That's what the Ramah is talking about.
But also for the chatichat fridim isn't the same thing that even for bishul for blood, it all goes to the surface, right? So I think that's the same idea, is that you'd still recognize you recognize the blood, right? Or the blood they would still need a klipa, right? Because it happens at the end, right? Because the blood all goes to the surface.
Maybe, I don't know.
He never says explicitly that you've chopped up this meat, right?
Yeah, well, it's certainly not the way I taught the class before. That's what I'm saying today.
Yeah. In other words, you've said different things in the past on this.
I've said what you said. Yeah, I think I understand it differently today.
Okay, so it's good.
All right, you take it. Think about it.
Yeah. So now I got to think about it. But I just want to. Towards the end of it, this is like 2 lines on the bottom. He says, "Ulefiza in la kelbim kom demakiro b'shayach klipa." Right. So he says, that we shouldn't be very lenient here in cases that where you can recognize the klipa, you still have to take the klipa. And but there is, and we haven't. I don't know if we're going to get to it, but a whole question about whether or not. Well, actually, I guess so. Let's look at the Chidushei Rabbi Akiva Eger on this. Yeah, go for it, Raphael.
Maybe the important point to take out of the shach is that klipa in many ways is opposed to the classical way that we look on like Taravot. Klipa, we're not actually looking asking if the substances are completely mixed. We're trying to extrude something that, if it's clear enough to be extruded, meaning it's not a tarovet, because it's extrudable. Meaning, if it's already inside, it's mitbashel. So if there is too much of it, or it's already a question of tarovot. But like when it leaves the realms of klipa, like dafka, the reason that it completely mixed, it's a reason to pass on the kula. That's the big chiddush here. That like klipa is like, we're assuming that something visible or something tangible is here in the surface, or in this just below the surface. It's not completely mixed inside
into everything else. Yeah, which, by the way, he's still saying, right, this is not a question of like, is klipa chumra, is klipa like mikar adin. This is a question of makiro ve'eno makiro. We know if you makiro, you have to get rid of things, right? This is like really nice distinction. I will say, just to Rav Nachum's point, if we right just after we stopped reading, it says avok shel v'adayin makiro be'inyan deshach be'klipa tzarich shishim. Right, that if you do recognize it, it's
even after you cooked it. In other words, cooking is not a cause of not recognizing it. So there's some kinds of cooking that will enable it to be recognized, and some that don't.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe I'm going to start to read it that way now. So I have to think about the actual case here. I don't know if anybody else thought about this.
I just checked the Marechet HaShulchan. He reads it like me.
He does read it like you. Okay. So Baruch Shekivanta. Not that I'm glad you're here this year. So, all right. I want to look through. Yeah, it's a very important point. So Chidushi, I want to look at Chidushi Rabbi Akiva Eger, who makes a different chiluk here between the different cases. Maybe Lexi, you want to read the Chidushi Rabbi Akiva Eger? The Dibur Machil is V'nir'eh de la Ka'amar. So it's on the Shach here. So
right. So this was again the Shach specific thing about limiting the Ramaz. We're in V'nir'eh de la Ka'amar, Magen Avram, Siman, Samach Zayin, etc. Mechalek the Daf Kahacha V'tata Gavar, Da Klipa Chumra Ba'alma, Da Admekar Le Bala Bezeh, Mikilim Diavad, Avalo Ba'alma Ayin Sham. So the Magen Avraham says that there's something, it's specifically here in the case of Tata Gavar that we're able to be more makil, because really the klipa is in and of itself already a chumra of, like, we say, well, probably as it's cooling down, it absorbed like a little bit, right? Because like, I guess he's like kind of picking up on the fact that the phrasing in the Gemara is like, yeah, we assume that there's a little bit of absorption that happens while it's being cooled down, but that it's like phrased as this kind of like uncertainty / chumra, or at least it's a way of reading the language there.
Exactly. So
was that the main part? Or do you want to keep reading?
Yeah, he gets into another point of like, if it's a continuous pour.
Yeah,
and that
he gives like the nifsak kiluach, and he says if you keep pouring, then it's potentially more of a problem, because then you have chanan, but maybe that's only an issue with with fat, which is Yeah,
but I just want to pause there because I wanted to just see that there's a different chiluk, which is that there are cases where it is mikar hadin, and cases which like salting might be one of those cases, and cases where which we're not going to get to the seif right now on salt, versus cases of tata gavar, which seems to be a case of the chumra ba'alma. So, and those are different. All right, I wanted to look at one more thing on this in the 6 minutes I have. Just make sure that none of the chat things are really good thing. Okay. Which is the Aruch HaShulchan, which is a really big chumrah on tata gavar, and I think though is very important. So I wanted to share my screen for this, and this is we're going to skip his basis of this, but I'll read to close this up. So this is the Aruch HaShulchan. He says, "Oh yes, shishol ve'echni nuchazal klal bazel lomar tata gavar. Im ken im nafal harbe chalav rotech al me'at basar tzonen v'ne'amar tata gavar u'mekarer talyon ve'in lecha davar tamur yoter mizeh she'arei einenu ro'ot she'achalav nishav retichato v'gam me'at basar nasa rotech v'chein lehefech." Right? He says, wait a second. If I have right? A lot of hot milk, and I've got a tiny piece of meat, and I pour the really hot milk on a tiny piece of meat. Are you going to tell me tata gavar? There's no way, right? That just doesn't make any sense. So, so he goes on. I'm gonna go on to see if you had bet here in him. Ve'yir'eh li barur demari sheshavinhem be'akamot lefi ze erech hachalav keinu gam kamot habasar v'lachen echelchu kazal hayachut shel mi gover halyon or tachton ve'ifseka hilchata tachton gover. Right? He says, look, they're talking about cases where you're about even in amount, right? That you have about as much milk as you have meat. Then there's a question of tata gavar ila gavar. But if it's a lot of hot thing coming down on a little bit of cold thing, this is not, you can't say tata gavar. That doesn't hold up there, right? And here's a proof. Uraya brura lezeh midivrei Tosfot Shabbat detanya noten adam chamin l'toch hasonen v'lo tzonen l'toch chamin. This is a case, actually, a question of Shabbat, and it's a machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai about whether or not can you put the hot into the cold or the cold into the hot on Shabbat from a cooking perspective. Upiresh Rashi mishum de tata gavar. Right, Rashi says this is that we paskin actually like Beit Hillel because of tata gavar. V'ikshua Tosfot im ken tikshim hacha. But Rav's voice doesn't show up in it. What Rav would say, well, wait a second, I've got proof here from Beit Shammai who don't agree with Beit Hillel. We're not looking to sugi inside. I apologize, right? That Ilah Gavar. Upiresh Rabbeinu Tam de'enza shayach lezeh ela chamin l'toch sonen mashmeh shehatzonen mirubeh me'achamin v'tzonen l'toch chamin mashmeh shechamin shalamatem rubim. And so Rabbeinu Tam explains why, because this is not the case of Rav and Shmuel. This is a case where you have a lot of substance on the bottom and not a lot being poured into it. And so that's a different case than it is than the case of when they're about equal. And that's we only say tata gavar in the case where you have approximately equal amounts between the two of them. I don't know if this is his kaddish or not, if he had it from somewhere else, but I think it's a very important point in tata gavar that we can't make this claim in cases where there's like a completely different amount coming from the top than on the bottom. Okay, I'm going to pause there. We have 3 minutes. Can we do some of hay in 3 minutes? We can do a little. Well, actually, you know what? Let's. Let's everyone skip to, because this is important. We've got 3 minutes. Skip to Chet in the Shulchan Aruch. Melicha is a big topic, and I kind of almost wish I had a few minutes just to cover the whole question about whether tata gavar still applies in cases of melicha, which is an important question. So Chet, maybe just to finish us up, Alan, can you read for us Chet in the Shulchan Aruch?
Yes. Ein basar b'chalav nasar al yedei melicha al yedei kavush ela be'achila aval lo b'hana. Right, basar b'chalav only gets forbidden for by melicha and kavush for purposes of eating, not for hana. So I could salt basar b'chalav together and then sell it, and there would be no problem.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't do it, but okay, good. I'm going to close there. Maybe give 1 more minute if anybody has any questions. Sorry we didn't get through everything today, but maybe Rav Nachum wants to let me do Melicha a little bit in the next class. I don't know, but so.
No, you guys have to do Melicha on your own.
Okay, fair enough.
In fact, there's all halachot of Melicha, which we didn't do. We have never done before. Before Basar B'chalav is Hilchot Melicha, which is also a topic that is taught a lot of times in Smicha Shiurim in some places, but not always.
Fortunately, most of us aren't salting our own meats nowadays, so.
Yeah, that's true.
True. But there is one topic that comes up, liver, which is somewhat relevant. But you're right; it's not such a relevant thing. Neither is shchita so much. We don't do shchita so often. Although there once was a Talmud who was a shochet.
The conservative yeshiva here has a shochtim program that some people have been in.
2 of my Hebrew college classmates are shochem.
It's
So we have more things to do in our lives. Become shochtim also. Yisher koach, Joel.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Hey.
Thank you.